Hello, here from Canberra, the capital town in Australia, just to show you that there is a place in the world where there is no snow and ice, and it's not quite as cold as Chicagoland. My name is Jens Mueller, and I will be working with you on our Global Management Course 647, a course that has run at NIU in the MBA program since 1987. And it is usually a highly ranked course among the customers because we approach in a very practical managerial sense a topic that is quite important, not just for what you currently do for work, but also what you may have as aspirations for the future. And that is how to interact in global markets and with global firms. It's probably quite hard for you right now to find any industry where you do not either have a lot of foreign employees, a foreign supply line, foreign competitors, or where there is money in foreign markets. And there's always more money outside a country than in a given country. And like bank robbers rob banks because that's where the money is, good traders look at global opportunities because that's where the money is. Let's talk about trade. Here at the gateway of India in Mumbai, clearly a sign from times where trade was not fair. It was not something that was done for the benefit of the trading nations, but it was for the benefit of the one nation, the one that was the colonial overlord. We now expect that trade agreements are fair, that trade agreements allow both countries to benefit, that trade agreements allow countries to focus on what they do best, the efficiencies that they have in order to export their efficient product and trade that for products other countries provide that are then efficient for them. That means that you focus on industries where you have an advantage, you then use those industries, and you create an advantage in other countries who want to buy your product that is of high quality, well made, cheaply priced, efficiently produced. That means that countries need to decide in what business they want to be. Do they want to be service countries, focusing on intellectual property that moves across borders, professional services? Do they want to produce IT? Do they want to produce machinery? Do they want to build things? Or do they want to be in the business of one specific industry that does quite well? Now, here in India, their main export is people. People that bring home significant amounts of money that they earn. Then come the spices, then comes IT, several specific industries in which India has an advantage. Of course, trading only works if you then purchase from other countries in return goods that they make efficiently. So it does balance out. Trade agreements that are unilateral, trade agreements that are for the benefit of only one nation do not work. So clever trade agreements take into account the needs of more than just one country, and therefore are sustainable, lasting, and they do increase the wealth of both or more nations. Whether here in Kathmandu, Nepal, in Chicago, in New Zealand where I live, it is absolutely essential that we are good at global trade. Not only because there will always be some things that we need to source from overseas because we can't efficiently manufacture them, but also because we want to earn money exporting. If you export more than you import, you get fresh money coming into the country. If you export less than you import, then there is a giant sucking sound of money out of the country. You could argue that maybe it's better that we don't trade. We have high walls, bad word, high borders, that makes it hard for trade to pass through, and that way we don't have to worry about money flowing out. But when you look at the wealth of nations, you look at countries that do well, and you look at countries that don't do well. Those who don't trade don't do well. And there's a reason for that. If you primarily deal with yourself in your own country, you trade money back and forth with providers in your own country within your borders, you essentially turn the same money around several times. That means that at some point, once you deduct taxes, you will be poorer than before. If you export, you have something that you make of a sufficient quality and you are efficient at doing it, then you will earn money because the market outside a country is always bigger than the market inside a country. So it is important for us to reflect on and work through what it will take to be globally effective. What are the ingredients that make a firm successful overseas? There are some firms that brands that that come from overseas into the US and that are very well in demand, whether that is cars, whether that's electronics, whether that is luxury bags from French companies, whatever it is. For whatever reason, they are high in demand, they command a high price, and those companies earn money in the US. We have some US firms that export very well. They bring money back in. If you look at export of education, we have many foreign students that come to the U.S., number fewer now than a couple of years ago, for obvious reasons. But as we are generally inviting, and we like to have people come in from outside the country, then we have people who come to the U.S., learn here, and leave money here. That's an export. So we will talk about the quality of relationships that are required in order to be good at importing and exporting. But we will need to talk about what it takes to trade well. Clearly, you need relationships with countries so that they open their markets and that you then have access to the markets. In return, they expect that you open your own markets. That, over time, results for many countries in somewhat of a balance. Even small countries like New Zealand and the South Pacific, nearest to 50 million penguins as a market, has a reasonably balanced trade balance. Other countries do not. Japan is an exporter, Germany is an exporter, China is an exporter, the US is an exporter, but we import so much and we export so little in comparison that we are left poor at the end. And the question then arises what we need to do in countries to have relationships with other countries that allow trade. When you came into your first destination here, you cracked open your blue passport at border control and they accepted that. They accepted your passport as a passport that allows you to enter the country because there is an agreement with the U.S. If you fall ill on your trip, if you need consular assistance because you get arrested for being drunken and disorderly and the other things that can happen, then there is a process for that the country and the U.S. have agreed upon. We have repatriation of citizens. We have extradition agreements. We have the Hague Convention that does not allow for children to be moved out of a country while there are court proceedings. We have all sorts of agreements between countries. And based on those agreements, countries interact. That extends to trade as well. So the way this course will run is that we have a blended delivery. You will, in your first stop, see some companies. We will then, on a Wednesday, move to the next stop, and we will see some more companies and executives and leaders, some American, some local. And we will make sure that this is a management group class, a board meeting class, not a lecture class. That means that we have some video materials available for you before you leave. Those are reasonably fresh, a couple of years old, they're updated, and they give you a good foundation of some of the topics we will talk about. We will then meet in your first stop and your second stop, and we will make sure that there is time for some class time on the road so we can walk through some of the topics. And ultimately, I want you to understand that trade, global trade and relationships don't come automatically. They come from hard work, they come from being together, they come from respecting a country and therefore ultimately having the ability to open markets. The purpose here is that we want to get you to a level of competence that makes you competent, able, and successful in a market that clearly, for nearly all industries, now includes a global component. You couldn't operate the healthcare system in the U.S. without having people coming in from outside the country to provide some of the staffing resource. We couldn't build many of the things we build if there wasn't a market in Europe and Asia where we can sell billions of dollars worth of goods and therefore have the resources to invent and to innovate. And for some of you, it might very well be that a career in Wheaton or a career in Naperville or a career in downtown Chicago is not the ultimate that you're aspiring to, but that you're looking at the opportunities of going overseas to then take advantage of expatriate opportunities there. This course is intended to create practical outcomes. It is not a research module. It is a management conversation, so this will be highly interactive,
and we will go through a number of key issues, some of them quite contentious right now in politics especially, to make sure that we all understand what the requirements are for not just any trade, but successful trade.
Think for a moment that most American firms that do export will earn a lot more, have a much higher margin on the same goods they make in the same factory for U.S. consumption when it is then shipped to overseas customers, because they would value American-made goods higher than they would other goods. So the export potential is not just to sell, it is also to contribute quite heavily to the bottom line profits of American firms. So when we, especially now in a fairly politically charged environment, talk about that some American firms will see a reduction of income from the operation in China, in Europe, and elsewhere, then that is not just an X% loss of sales. It is a exponential loss of profits, because usually with export sales, higher profits attach. So let's look at the fairness for a moment of trading. You would have heard about a trade balance. When a country imports as much as it exports, it is in perfect balance. Never happens. But you usually have either a trade surplus, China or Europe have a trade surplus with the US, or you have a trade deficit. That means that you import a lot more and you export a lot less. That means we have a giant sucking sound, the Ross Perot sucking sound from years ago, out of the US, with dollars being sent overseas to pay for the goods that we import, while a lot less dollars, fewer dollars, come back in to the US from the sale of our exports. Now, you can probably argue that from time to time we run a little over, and from time to time we have a little surplus. That's like your checking account at home. But the US for the last 20, 30 years has had a trade balance deficit, a significant deficit of between $30 and $50 billion, now wait, per month. That's essentially $500 billion plus per year. That trade deficit has accelerated sharply over the last 6 to 9 months, because we now see that it is harder for American firms to position themselves overseas given the political acrimony that exists, while at the same time American consumers still want to buy stuff that they believe is good value for their money, and they don't want to be told to buy in the US. They want to get their Bosch mixers, they want to get their Italian coffee makers, they want to get their German cars, and they want to get cheaply made clothes in China, Malaysia, Cambodia, and so forth. So when we have a significant trade balance deficit, politics weighs in. And politics has a nasty way to influence markets, or attempt to. It's never really worked. And if you look at countries that use politics in order to affect trade, you usually have a declining trade with other countries. And then we very quickly come to the poor nations in the world, and we end up in North Korea and Cuba, where you have very, very little trade, and you have terrible conditions under which people live or suffer.
In business schools, we wrestle with how we can make assessments practical. And I think all of you would have a eyelid-dropping moment where you would argue that a multiple choice question is clearly not the way to test in an MBA program, that an essay is really not helpful in forming good thoughts that help you with a new career. So we will also work on some alternative, quite innovative, and in the recent past certainly quite successful assessment formats. So let's walk through practically how this works. Before this paper starts, we will have a quick video chat with Anne involved and have everybody coming together so we can answer questions, make sure that we're on the same page and we're ready to go. You will then have links to several videos, and those videos will give you some of the key tools that we will need to discuss trade and how trade works for everyone. We will go to 2 towns. We will go to Seoul in Korea and to Singapore. In Seoul, we will meet with CEOs. We will certainly talk about how business operates. We'll look around, see how American firms are positioned there. Clearly a country that has benefited greatly from an American presence at the DMZ. We will then move down to Singapore, where in addition to seeing companies operate and seeing how Americans operate overseas, we will also teach That means that you can walk away with a separate certificate having attended university classes in Singapore.
So we have 3 assessments. The first one is that we simulate a hallway discussion with your CEO and board chair. We do this in a special Facebook group that we have for this course, a secret group where only you are members and only you can see what's happening. And I will walk you through in quite detail how we actually do that. We'll do that on the road, usually on that Wednesday or Thursday during the week, and all you need is access to internet and we're ready to go. And we usually do that right before we hit the bar so that we have something to celebrate. The second part is that I want you, when we come to the end of the course, in class, probably on that Friday evening or Saturday, tell me in a quick group presentation whether you would go to country 1 as a U.S. exporting company, if you would go to country 2, or if you would decide to stay in the U.S. with good reasons. And so we will do this in kind of a competitive format, and the groups will compete, and ultimately that will do the grade. And the last assessment is probably the most relevant one. I want you to do a video. 5 minutes should do it. You can do more if you have to, in which you tell me first who you have seen, who you know in your company or elsewhere, who is great as a global leader. And you will be hard-pressed to find any recent CEO appointment at a large firm who does not have a strong global experience and footprint. That means you can then tell me what skills that person has globally that were developed over time. Then you tell me where you are in that same skill spectrum. And I would assume that you're not quite there yet. So we have a gap. And that gap would mean that you have an action plan ready over the next 5 years. And I want you to tell me in detail what you will do to close that gap. So we start with you ranking yourself a 1 if you think Elgin is the center of the universe and you'll never leave Illinois in your whole career, and a 10 that you could smoothly, seamlessly pop up anywhere in the world and do as good as the American business leaders that we would have seen on the trip. Clearly, we're in between the 1 and the 10. Then you tell me what good leaders need. You find examples for that. 2 should do it. And then I want a detailed plan of what you will do to become a globally effective leader. We will have a quick video discussion, and usually sets that up about a week or 2 before we go on the trip so we can chat. And then we end up with a week or so, 10 days, that gives you a chance to go through the videos. Then we'll meet, and then we'll work on the road through the various topics. I look forward to seeing you soon. And if you have any questions, I will blend in a way to contact me. Absolutely feel free to do that. Safe travels. I'll see you soon.